Okay, you know, I've been thinking about that thing about the Mickey Mantle, Marlin Brando, Swordfish, No Fly Zone, and in such a way that somewhere in between baseball and the Mickey Mantle No Fly Zone, and that score in tennis, VantageLove30. Um, um, in a secret de facto type of pi in pi r squared. Pi, like a pie chart, sometimes reflect maybe, most of the time, maybe a percentage of what normally a plane horizon represents as a percentage, not necessarily a plane horizon that's a little bit different than a pie chart, called a plane horizon in a way, in importing and exporting, and the word being used is country having the predominant source of it's what it produces in that way, involving international importing and exporting. So I mean, there's the VantageLove30 thing, and how de facto might even, and there's certain things about the VantageLove30 and just the secret de facto type of thing, or the note that's legal tender for all debt, both public and private, and that thing about VantageLove30, and how a ground rule double, similar to baseball in the way of what a ground rule double is, and what's actually required in a tennis game with doubles that normally present, like the tennis court itself dictates of the margin between a singles and a doubles type of with four people on the court, that marginal spread. I mean, it's really almost like commercial paper in a way of what not that it has to be exchanged, although there's like the thing of whether or not if stock exchange or the word itself, it's exchange commission, sometimes even Securities Exchange Commission would suggest maybe a method of banking in a way of whether an accusation that whether or not if a standard practice would suggest that a method of banking had maybe been considered always wrong, or in the case of what the word de facto normally suggests as involving litigation, or an accusation of settlement, normally, but not limited to how de facto is actually used at corporate levels, or even international issues that are standards that are set, not limited but similar, very much so, not in comparison, but as far as like tracking systems, for example, and categorized as telematics, normally like OnStar is to like General Motors, in the way, or even like global positioning systems and geographic information systems in that way of like tracking system, like OnStar has for General Motors and GM, and how GMAC in the way of what maybe commercial paper might dictate as a thing about the VantageLove30 thing, and how de facto VantageLove30 would be like a secret de facto of pi, and how pi, as a matter of fact, its pronunciation, and like in the way of what I'm referring to, it seems so much about really the swordfish, and it's kind of like it ultimately gets to like a commercial I was watching about the Marines with the sword, and it's like it is etching, a laser etched type of pattern that's almost like I don't want to call it vines in the way, but it's a pattern similar to give the impression of some sort of thing about the and I'll get back to that later. But right now, I'm thinking about the laser etching, and the words are forging steel is what the deal is. The word forge, and like something like a blacksmith, or manufacturing metal and what forging really means to metallurgy, in that way of like what forging really is to maybe even a blacksmith in that way, some old time stuff, but not limited to, and truthfully how a color code associated with you probably heard it before, you know, the pen is mightier than the sword, but truthfully, I mean, if it really gets ultimately to the commercial of forging steel, if that's actually an accusation of a method of banking in the way of maybe VantageLove30, to the extent of what secret de facto and pi, and how pi is actually 30 PIE as compared to pi based upon pronunciation PI, like 3.1416. Okay, in this case, you know, I'm showing a little bit of a direction towards pi r squared being a 3.1416. Okay, and like the one holy day during the week, normally like Sunday, you know, or you know, the Seventh-day Adventist like things like Saturday, or you know, maybe what SAT means in that way, specifically a Saturday and a SAT thing, in that way. Okay, and you know, the highest possible score on it, SAT is like 2400, and automatically that's like military time, like that. So you know, I was thinking about that commercial, you know, with the Marines about forging steel. Okay, and what that actually suggests, based upon, you know, just if pronunciation by itself only sounds like a method of banking, by way, and then it gets to the is the pen mightier than the sword, and ultimately it's getting to the, you know, is Pinocchio mightier than the sword? Okay, so if it's really like a pi r squared issue, you know, it's kind of like, you know, hey Bitcoin, where's your drumstick? Somewhere in between the bicentennial quarter, or you know, like Oracle itself, like hey Oracle, you know, up your 1.0, or you know, or some greatness about the method of, you know, what free enterprise maybe suggests to even database administration, or how firmware likewise suggests legal media in that way of what, you know, firmware as compared to middleware might thoroughly suggest. But I mean, just one word. So you know, like in the way of firmware, I mean, you'll see very much sometimes, you know, at certain levels of international law, not limited to, but you know, predominantly so, like a law firm, in that way, and how firmware is you know, just you know, whether practical application is involved to, you know, methods of banking, and you know what that really means. Truthfully, you know, Oracle's like real cool in so very many ways. I've looked at a lot of things about the database administration, as well as middleware, firmware, predominantly, you know, looking at the free enterprise, as well as, you know, the database administration, which at the time was like the 10G getting into the 11G type of software involving database administration in Oracle. Okay, in that way, you know, it's kind of like it was getting into the part of whether or not if some value of like you know, is the pen mightier than the sword, and some greatness about a ground rule double, you know, somewhere in between, you know, a MickeyMantleMarlinBrandO swordfish, I mean, for real, in a no-fly zone in that way, and how marlins are actually not only and including a bird. You know, many people might talk about a sailfish, but you know, a marlin likewise, and why, you know, sailfish sometimes are categorized as flying, but it's really not a sailfish. It's really a swordfish. That's about, you know, the marlin, the bird marlin, as well as, you know, other, you know, things about the bird that, like, you know, is not limited to, say for example, the Blue Jays in baseball, or you know, the Marlins likewise, you know, in that way, and color codes that might thoroughly get real specific in the way of what marlin is to a swordfish, a MarlinBrandO swordfish in that way. You know, it's kind of like a Yeah, Marlon Brando. Yeah, I mean, so for real about the Mickey Mantle thing, and predominantly, on 18-hole golf courses, and a lot of places, the chimney, predominantly a lot of, not necessarily country clubs, but like the huge, thing about the 18-hole golf course and the 18-hole as compared to the 2 9-hole golf course. Get the 18-hole golf course, the Mega Lodge thing and the thing about the how true it is now, but it used to be like a real predominant thing about a lot of information that would show that normally it would be like a chimney and a chimney having a mantle, okay, and how Mickey Mantle, and a Marlin Brando swordfish, it's almost, is, and then it's getting to like the VantageLove 30 and why, a ground rule double is actually including what deuce means in tennis in that way, a requirement. Like baseball is a ground rule double. I mean, it's for sure a requirement in tennis in that way, in chronological order, for to be eligible and meet the requirements for the one score that wins, whether it's a set or the game or whatever the case may be. But there's something about principle of interchangeability in that way between the deuce as a requirement. Likewise, in baseball, like a Mickey Mantle, Marlon Brando swordfish, and like a ground rule double, or the Mount Olives thing about really for real, how Mount Olives and something seriously about the a re-entering heaven thing, okay, and there's phenomenal brains about it, and unlike many, in any case, I'm like thinking about quite a bit about that and how ERP technology, why it's ERP, yeah. The thing about the hopsing thing and how hopsing is almost like an oriental, if orientation is like getting straight into the Sox and Goldman Goldrich thing about panning for gold, and how panning is normally associated with a spectrum and panoramic academia in the way of what even legal media or depositions in that way mean to the camera eye, or what a national deficit available in closed caption hearing means in methods of banking inside the bank, and what a discount window as compared to the Federal Open Market window as compared to a discount window, and how the 12 Federal Reserves distinguish how commercial paper representing very much about distinguishable difference of commercial paper being used in that way on a daily basis, sometimes referencing what a marginal spread really truthfully is terminology involving the New York Stock Exchange. I mean, if the entire thing is about the word exchange, and there's like something about an exchange that suggests a method, a standard method, it ultimately gets to whether or not, if like for example an acronym, a database administration, is taught many times, many much so, not all the time, but and why it's that way with a DBA, the acronym normally associated to database administration, suggested it's taught as like doing business as if it's kind of like do people like not know I mean, is that like a state bar, American Bar Association excuse for the state of grace type of thing with like in need of higher education? Likewise, in addition, I mean, is that only the 2 9-hole golf course suggesting what paramount is to a para, not necessarily the meeting the requirements, of the degree. Likewise, in addition, I mean, if it's truthfully just a combination of what Robert Half means in the way of what the paramount thoroughly suggests, even to like my perception of like what Japanese is reading the Japanese, according to the information I've been given and have found and looked at, is that the Japanese alphabet, according to the information I've seen, how true it is truthfully, I mean, really, but anyway, that's what I've been looking at, as it's been 22 letters, okay? It looks all symbolic more than like alphabetical to me, although read from like top to bottom, in structure, and there's something about the values in that way of absolute, and whether if a peripheral would be considered in panoramic, like an alignment in a parallel universe type of thing, like 180 degree and alignment in a parallel universe type of thing, going a little bit beyond, what two-dimensional isometrics of three-dimensional of actual participation, and some ridiculous, not necessarily ridiculously, but truthfully, I mean, the toilet paper explains all that. I mean, for real. I mean, it's about as daily as does anyone realize something of isometric value, that way of two-dimensional flat plane surfaces? I mean, really. And what it actually means, actual participation really is really of isometric, giving the impression of three-dimensional of actual participation. Likewise with blueprints, it's the same way as even in schematics. It's the same principle. In commercial paper is a term used in the New York Stock Exchange. And if all that is suggesting what actual participation is, it's only a reflection of whether a stock exchange is whether or not if it's live on air, or distinguish the difference between legal media and deposition in the way of what a live current affair or a live current event, or a live current or some memory of an archive division as having fair use of what intellectual is, or who is actually maybe suggested as having possession. Almost like an escrow account, normally identified as a third person, a third party, a third easement in the way of intellectual possessing, having the value that is considered actually available as borrowing the information and paying, and it has paid for a duration of whatever the lifespan of that intellectual means. Somewhere in proper English grammatical composition, there's the pronoun, and I've been really looking real hard about it, and really I'm going a lot on my memory first, and I'm just really taking my time thinking about it. Why one pronoun cannot be used as a subject of the four types of pronouns, and then it's ultimately gotten almost to something about is it thoroughly is it like aggro got an issue between a paradiddle as compared to a rudiment. I mean, is it really the egg roll thing, Mount Olives, in such a way of what that means, drum roll please, and notice the similarities of tempo kind of thing between, what an alignment means to, is elastic involved, but hey, Bitcoin, where's your drumstick? I mean, is it really ultimately getting to a fashion statement of what maybe jugular volley might mean to underwear, or, really, or, whether or not if the elastic is the punchline. I mean, really, seriously, I mean, it really gets to what elastic means in a way, even to, Pinocchio, or pi r squared, using a radius, knowing that there's really more to it than, and to actually find, the answer, a formula, such as pi r squared is used. So, I mean, it's almost like the exclusionary rule provision, a practical application in so many ways, and the acronym ERP, and the Wyatt Earp thing, and it's really getting to something about the delta in the triangle and the delta force in a way of what pi r square means to by principle it's only a line, okay, with the triangle, with the delta force representative of the triangle, and what pi r squared really is to a VantageLove30, or for example the secret de facto pi r squared, and how 3.1416 is like the tribe of Reuben in a way, for the mere sake and intent. There's 2 days in a weekend, okay, but one holy day, but both holy days is either based upon preference or what experience mean, or whether or not if it's just a Seventh-day Adventist SAT of military grade in principle, powers and principalities in high places, with the truth about what a weekend really is, in not limited to a religious way, but maybe even a degreed level, going beyond what people's perception of what religion is, and in my particular case, I'm thoroughly focusing on Christianity, because and in between, the Book of Mormon, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and maybe what that really has as far as whether or not the exchange is kind of hey, have you been going to an American church? kind of like thing, you know. It's kind of like, you know, or what does that mean, you know, in a way of, you know, the King James, or you know, a lack of experience, knowing that Israel is like 64 and an American anyway. I mean, if there's a single difference of, you know, knowing what a 90-degree right angle is to absolute value, or, you know, a suggested, or even a method of calibration, and, you know, seasonal changes, and even spherical quadrants, and like, you know, world globe mapping, you know, in spherical quadrants, you know, in the shape of a football, or, you know, in my thing of like even principle of exchange. So if it's something like in between, you know, what the three axes of outing is to the intersects representative of like the spherical quadrants based upon shape, or if it's the exchange, stock exchange of axes, involving polarity, you know, with like perfected seasonal changes, normally dictating a quadrant of, you know, one of four being one quadrant, even, you know, spherical quadrants, and, you know, national, really globalization worldwide is the point. But, you know, it's kind of like, you know, is it really the exchange that suggests whether or not, if the exchange is a symbolic and representation between, you know, the third and fourth generation type of deal, and what outing means, you know, to NASA, in the way of like rocket idolatry, and, you know, the you know, I'll get a little humor about that a little later, you know, the rocket thing, okay, and rocket science, and what NASA is, and rocket science, and you know, my thing about it, and the space shuttle and color codes, you know, ultimately get into even the Sea of Galilee and the seagull thing, and how, you know, Israel, being 64, like, you know, American movie, and, you know, I mean, you know, the list goes on and on. You know, I don't like saying minus A, music minus A, for the mere sake of being involved in, you know, I'm not real thrilled about something about it, although alphanumerically equates to 64. But in any case, yeah, so I'm, you know, I'm not trying to throw that, you know, minus A, you know, or excuse, you know, the thing about like 8, you know, not the excuse, and like, you know, participation, and not the pi r squared, you know, defective leave of absence, or, you know, whether the grade has been made beyond, you know, the SAT at the Seventh-day Adventist thing about what religion means on a 2-day weekend, or, you know, a choice or option between what religion means on a weekend, the two thing, as compared to, you know, like pi r squared, and what that really means to like the triangle, and one line of pi r squared, you know, being something about, you know, whether prompting is really the issue between like a national deficit and available in closed caption for the hearing impaired. In that way, what the delta force is representative of the triangle in schematics that way, you know, even the pyramid, you know, that way of like, you know, on the backside of the US $1, or, you know, the Star of David in Israel, and like a due west type of absolute value with the code blue, like the vertical bars of like absolute, and the algorithm, and what that means, you know, all the way going through like, you know, through algebra and calculus, and going a little bit beyond what waveform really is, beyond, you know, certain factors of legal media and deposition, and what waveform really means to waveform, and unmistakably, you know, I mean, there, you know, there's truthfully, you know, and the thing about waveform, and audio production, and the reality of what codes annotated, or, you know, certain factors of like color code in that way, but I'll get on that later. But, you know, it's kind of like back to the you know, the Marines commercial about the forging steel thing, okay? I mean, just hearing that and not seeing the commercial, or the laser etching the sword, or having any pi r squared factor of what like even Pinocchio suggests, or, you know, truthfully, even a surface to air thing, you know, I mean, there's a little humor there about Pinocchio, you know, and Pinocchio's on deck, you know, with the highest on deck ERA, and Marlin Brando Swordfish is at the plate, right, and the pitch, and boing, it's a ground rule double, you know, and the VantageLove30 thing, you know, I mean, really, a ground rule double, truthfully, when it gets to you know, tennis as well as that baseball, and a ground rule double, like, you know, it's a demanded requirement in tennis, you know, for deuce, and the one score, you know, actually being a total of 3 points, but the two being a requirement consecutively and chronologically immediately, to meet the requirement, for the final winning score, whether it be a set or the game, or in principle. In that way, I'm looking at the principle. I'm just really trying to think about the principle, of all that, with the ground rule double as compared to, the baseball thing. Okay, and like, like seriously, some current, some referencing of what that means as a method of banking, or even New York Stock Exchange, and what exchange means to, like, hey, you should have known better kind of like thing, or is it really what only availability means based upon if degree level is only the issue of whether a national anthem is only having fair use of like non-negotiable, non-transferable itemization, what that means to escrow as an easement, or really what that means to Robert Half in the way of what even a zip code in the way of even the U.S. dollar, right? And looking at it like that in that way, with that little symbolic representation, with a Nuit, see Holy Miracle, I call it the Holy Miracle, like spirit of adoption thing. It's like a Brazoria country thing. I live right in the immediate area, just right, right in Pearland, Texas, and certain things about the thing about between Harris being 73, or like Egypt and that pyramid, or even certain factors of like Israel being like the real thing of a point of origin of what Christianity is thoroughly based on, or someone's not lack of experience and know what absolute value means to a 90-degree right angle in that way of absolute value that like gets into the power and principalities in high places and color codes, even representative of the absolute values normally associated with algorithm. And I choose to use that word algorithm and combine something of like medical technology involving chemistry and modern medicine in that way because of a perpendicular spiral, and just the word itself, labyrinth, okay, and algorithm, it was just like an immediate thing, not necessarily a synonym, antonym, maybe so. I hadn't really looked at that part about synonym, antonym thing, or certain factors of like hooked on phonics and not necessarily phonics, although syllables given the impression of direction based upon experience, achievement based upon merit in that way of just like knowing certain factors of even signal processing and audio production of a perpendicular spiral in that way, and how waveform is involved, going beyond certain factors of audio production, and how paramount and the mountain thing and the 22 stars. Here's the thing that I really am looking at, since Pearland is like 71 and Japanese is 71, and Japanese is read from like top to bottom like a vertical column. I mean, it's kind of like hey Bitcoin, where's your drumstick almost, kind of like thing about what pi r squared is, even to like polarity axis, even the rotation of the entire planet, planet Earth, in the way of like perfected seasonal changes, and what not necessarily a spherical quadrant, but in the way of like 1/4, like one season of the year, the 4 seasons of the year, being like a quadrant in the way of what perfected seasonal changes is to maybe even the right angle degree, the duets, compass bank and other factors involving magnetic force fields that like dictate if there's the tolerance of peripheral, giving reference to even what a protractor is, to even a flat line, or what a flat line is with or without the shape of like maybe what a rainbow would dictate, and the color codes involved with what something very much about an alignment in a parallel universe is to a protractor and a 300-degree circle, and what surface to area is to circumference in that way, if circumference is really the issue, or volume based upon the perception of going beyond what volume is to maybe a flat plane representative of circumference, or going to the volume of that, and getting the 3-dimensional thing about going beyond the surface, getting the surface to air thing, in that way of what isometrics is to like blueprints or schematics, Likewise, even plain horizons of like international importing and exporting based upon principle, not limited to the pie chart, but the plain horizon that truthfully is involved with like international import and exporting of what gross national product is. I mean, if it's even termed truthfully as gross national product, economics, it's kind of like I took economics and there was like something about the information that just looked only specifically to me like logistics and statistics, and like where's the real economics? I mean, all that looks just like logistics and statistics, and the difference. What that really means to whether or not that like the one pronoun that cannot be used as a subject is really the issue of like third party and how intellectual of what an easement is to what whether or not if the thing about why one pronoun cannot be used as a subject is it thoroughly because of the third party of intellectual is retaining easement of what value means in a descriptive way, maybe even reverberation in the way of what sometimes maybe silent partnership is or is not in business law or even corporate law, or what escrow is to tariff in the way of importing and exporting to a two-dimensional isometric plane horizon, equating to like actual participation of like three-dimensional, of actual participation in a way based upon, principle itself. And I was looking at that commercial, with the Marines, Forged and Steel, and how that laser was etching. You might see it on like some type of fences, predominantly some of the older that reflect maybe designs of like iron in that way. That use like vines and in certain type of patterns of like leaves as a standard, like involving like fencing and iron gates and stuff like that. And it's true that something about the thing about that pattern, it thoroughly reflects a thing about the fence and what the fence is. If it's only getting to the the four corners of the earth and the architecture, the platform, and once again the embedding and encryption of a duration of what maybe what intellectual means even in world history or an executive life on in power politics in high places of what interchangeability and compatibility mean to principle in that way of like practical application, not limited to maybe it was intended but not limited to, in anticipation of like futures and options, maybe of how the interchangeability and compatibility would suggest the anticipation of recommendable, reputable standards of consensual participation, and in so very many ways of what the compatibility of interchangeability means based upon principle itself and practical application, and made that way, what would normally possibly not have a need for like each other in that way, manufactured in that way for compatibility for future. Not that it has to be the word reference, but a standard that would naturally be the standard of futures and options, and what that really is, and that way. And I've been thinking so much about the principles and powers and biblical terminology and certain factors of degree level, even Christian Science in that way, and thinking about even certain types of commercials, and really it's like Pinocchio and the two-dimensional flat plane surface, and is it really the Pinocchio thing of like even a pi r squared factor, whether or not if the thing about it is like it's like the pi r squared using the radius to find the actual reality of what length is. So, I mean, if it's really getting to the point, is Pinocchio mightier than his sword? The pen Pinocchio, amazingly, something to maybe think of what that really means. I'm sure that people had heard that many a times, And yeah, I've heard that too. The pen is mightier than the sword, in a way. But there's like way more to it, and I've been thinking about virtually everything I can think about, involving that in a way like that. Not that it needs to be, or what it means to intellectual in the way of distinguish the difference between sustaining vibrato as compared to reverberation. I mean, if it's an ergonomic factor, whether prioritization or what practical application means of principle itself, and if it's really a human capital thing, a degreed level of what working with each other in not necessarily a computer or a thing, like a reputable standard, a degree in a way that even circuits represent, and really not the word represent but really is, or what that means even in form, waveform, or in certain levels of where the word's at, and not naive to something about it. So, something I'm like really considering, how the VantageLove 30 score as compared to a singles tennis game as compared to a doubles, and what that means to Mount Rushmore, or sequencing characters in sets of 4, the way of what binary numbers is to computer programming, sequencing characterization of 4s in VantageLove 30. I mean, it's gotten to a point that where I was thinking of, distinguish the difference. Is it really ultimately getting to a ground rule double, and really is the elastic really the punchline, and a more hey, is that like Art Linkletter, at the pearly gates, but Calamity you got to open up, and all that prepaid postage, humor about Calamity Jane, and not limited to Calamity, or what waveform means to a pearl, and what that means to even the pearly gates of heaven, in the way of what prepaid postage, even prepaid postage, what that is to, like, a pi r squared, normally associated with what a line is, or what polarity axis is to what would only give the impression, if you're not there you wouldn't be able to see it even though it exists. But that's like a common knowledge of, like, using the formula of pi r squared. You know it exists whether you see it or not. I mean, it's designed and manufactured as a known fact, as a formula that way. I mean, it's almost like, based upon principle, even what religion is in Christianity is thoroughly based in its entire thing about, it's really the reality of more brains to it than just like, that, and I focus a lot on that one word, the transfiguration, and the Mount Olives thing. There's a lot of humor about that. Not really, but truthfully, I'm really trying to find the brains about, the humor, not necessarily the word joke. I'm not real thrilled about anything that way, because when I was like really younger, I really didn't distinguish the difference between a joke or humor, and personally, in any case, I don't want that to be a question or intent, or some accusation of demeaning the value of a person's religious choice, mine predominantly of Christianity, and how I see like the Star of David, the 6-point star, being the 2 triangles, going down, maybe what the U.S. dollar might only suggest to what the endorsement really means in a transaction in that way of, like even a flat plane surface, on the backside, even representative of, truthfully, in my thing about, what it really means. I mean, even to a baptism, representative, even a representative of what even a baptism means, in that way, truthfully so, and what it means to me personally, and biblically, in that way of like we are all one in Christ, through the baptism, and what that endorsement really means to like intellectual, or whether or not if a degree level is only based upon having fair use of non-negotiable, non-transferable itemization, based upon maybe the thought that maybe having fair use is like sometimes maybe a consideration in the way of what privilege is. But like, is anyone going to make the grade that don't really grasp what it means. And there's a lot of things about that personally um, I look at, because I've looked at a lot of international law of special direction that I thoroughly looked at in my direction, including on Westlaw. Other factors involving just reading in terminology of like international financial management, or the big word globalization, predominantly all the time in international financial management, or some like greatness about SAN software and securities and annuities, and whether if the N is really the word network, or what internet protocol means to like SAN software or an IP address, you know, and in a way what an IP address is to internet protocol. Yeah, so like it's kind of like that one word in Thessalonians being Mount Olive issue, and whether or not if some like domicile reality of the humor about hey, that guy at the zoom lens in the planetarium thing, kind of like alignment in a parallel universe, the humor, but really is the elastic, the punchline, once again, the humor about planetarium and the telescope and the elastic in like a drummer thing, like, hey, Bitcoin, where's your drumstick, compared to the bicentennial quarter, and that drummer on snare drum on the backside doing your celebration of like America, and really what 200 years means alphanumerically. Likewise, in addition, what the 13 stars normally associated with like American history of like the 13 colonies. Sometimes it gives reference, not really identifying plantation in that way, or what a right to assemble suggests being managed and used, or and maybe even storage area networks in a way of maybe what commerce dictates as internet protocol, and what .com is to commerce, or internet protocol in the way of what an IP address is or is not, or whether the address is at CVS, or whether or not if prompting is really ever going to ever be proved, or if anyone really ever will even know if like prompt command like on a lot of laptops or is really offline at all, and what internet protocol is to IP address, and it seems so different whether or not a prompt command that suggests maybe what normal standards of like communication might dictate offline, as compared to is it really offline, or is it like online, or like does even a degree genius like believe they really know what the difference, or have been like to the point of like even having a need to what teleprompting is in prompt command. Yeah, truthfully so. So anyway, yeah, a lot I'm looking at and thinking about in that way, and certain factors of like even constitutional law ratifying and codifying, and how the amendments predominantly like right now, my thing about the freedom of speech, the freedom of the press, not necessarily that the Fifth Amendment would even suggest and a thing of like no self-incrimination, and the thing of it is certain things about the Fifth Amendment. My thing about it is, not necessarily the right to remain silent for, but in a way, I mean, in such a way, like a silent partnership in business law, what the Fifth Amendment is, fifth, the 5 THs being 33, it's almost like a life expectancy of like, religious value of like even like the Lord Jesus Christ, which, based upon just my calculation, or maybe there's a converting scale of what, life meant, in the Old Testament as compared to the New Testament, that range from, a lifespan, of like, really up to like 800 years, or even 900 as far as I know, of like, a duration of like a lifetime. In any case, I mean, if that is the ultimate standard of conversion between maybe what on or offline is, or what prompting is, as compared to legal media and deposition by practical application and principle, and what a power and principality to practical application of like principle really is, maybe the values of the Old Testament of some like scale of converting mathematics in a way of maybe, how I see it, like even the Lord Jesus Christ's lifetime representative and my thing about, maybe, 33 years of age, maybe. And, I've looked at that, and I've actually tried to actually put a little time in it, but I haven't really seriously put time, but that's what I'm thinking about, that way of, the referencing, of what lifespan is in the Old Testament as compared to, like, the color code predominantly red when the Lord Jesus Christ is speaking in that way. And what that color code is, in many ways, and the converting mathematics, I mean, if it's ultimately getting to a mathematical conversion that would represent maybe scale or magnitude in the way of the mere words of, like, even linguistic applied to alphanumerics in that way, because when a person studies alphanumerics, I mean, really without linguistics and studying language, people's perception may be of, like, English, that they've had English and that they've studied language. Truthfully, I mean, that's just like thoroughly skimming the surface. Unlike anything, when linguistics is truthfully studying language, I mean, far beyond in so many different ways. It's like seriously so very in depth and very concentrated of integration and practical application based upon, powers and principalities, and how principles are like so, I mean, at degree levels of, compatibility and interchangeability, and in that way, and doesn't place a limit and makes a more increased value that way. Yeah, truthfully so. So, my thing about, like even Christianity and the Lord Jesus Christ, my thing about, my thing about 33 years of age, and what that is to Mount Olives, or, ascending back into the heaven, the transfer, the word is transfiguration, and the alphanumerics of 192, okay? And that a new accomplice above the pyramid, it's kind of like a, I'll have to think about it. I'm just going to throw the 206 minus 192, a new accomplice minus transfiguration equaling 12. I'll have to think about it real quick, but I think it's a new accomplice based upon its symbolic representation equating to 58, and all the alphanumeric values of the layers of a nuit, see, the symbolic representation, PTIS, I think it's 206. Anyway, minus the word transfiguration of, like, re-entering heaven, and how Mount Olives in that way equate to 12, and why you see spherical quadrants of globalization and international financial management and globalization, and quarterbacks having the number 12. It's kind of like, the number 12 really is spelled out with letters is like 87, like the truth, and I think it's like, what, miracle God or something like that. What, 61 and what, 26 is what, 87, yeah. So like, 12 being, spelled out is like 87, the truth and a miracle God and a whole bunch of stuff, right? So anyway, a degree, quarterback would really know that. And it's like I'm looking at the why one pronoun cannot be used as a subject. It's kind of like, hey man, you like got a promiscuous color code with a football, man. Is there like more prioritization, maybe in a more adequate direction? Is that really why, one pronoun cannot be used as a subject because of the 3-point stance, man? You need to reprioritize. Come on, man, you kidding me? Wait a minute, are you looking for Mount Olives? Wait a minute, I thought you were playing football. Okay, all right, okay. Anyway, yeah. So anyway, in that way, seriously, it's kind of, not, I'll throw a little humor in it about it, but anyway, yeah. So in that way, without any axis, and the power square factor, it's kind of like, like there's like a ton of information of a lot I've been, looking at and like really getting into for like years, really, and there's like a lot more going on, and really I'm kind of like, I had no plan to like putting this like on, or talking about any of this really, predominantly, like I'm on my YouTube.com channel at Wade ASVPRIDDY, it's like a map thing, it's like a family name, yeah, for real, PRIDDY, pretty Texas thing, but like, really, in any case, it's like a Texas thing, okay. In any case, yeah, in any case, yeah. So, I look at like a lot of things about that in the black dot, or, even, certain factors of like color codes in space exploration that way. Not limited to, the black books of like U.S. constitutional law and, statutes annotated. Not limited to the state of Texas, but, as well, Texas statutes, Texas state statutes annotated, and all the volumes as compared to, the other books of color code, not limited to the categorization of like volumes. But yeah, that is the word volume, and somewhere in the delta force in that triangle, what a black representation means on the map in space exploration, and what family law and or even shadow government in a way of like national security, that way, I'm like looking at a lot of things that about that in that way, because the color code of like statutes annotated, I mean the word volume, it's like so there, okay, and how the delta force and what that really means in communication, or is it that it means, or does it mean, or it's like some consciousness, perception about it. So in any case, yeah. So like I'm like looking at a lot of things about what that means in family law, or in the way of like going a little bit beyond what family law means as far as color code, beyond business law, and what warehousing as compared to storage area networks and SAN software, and the acronym, the Securities and Annuities Network as compared to the storage area network itself, and distinguishable difference of what that acronym is, and why like agencies and bureaus actually use them. I compare certain factors of like simplicity of like Washington D.C., Washington being 130, or like electronics and the way of an electronic god, or like even television, or D.C. being direct circuitry, and what D is to FBI minus CIA or Mount Rushmore, the way of connectivity of like attaching the U.S. dollar, not limited to kind of like thing, and even Christian religion in that way of what a pyramid is, what it means in volume, and representing of the delta force that uses the triangle to represent, not limited to what volume is as delta, even the biggest mouth, like of a river, before like a mouth of a river is like about like real close to the ocean, and what that really means that way when you see that word volume, like specifically, not limited to like statutes annotated and a color code maybe of space exploration, in the way of family law beyond business law, and what that means in corporate venue. Yeah, truthfully so, I'm looking at like a huge amount, and like really I haven't in so many ways, but like I started looking and studied in a way alphanumerically, combining what was years of like alphanumerics alone, and then getting into the linguistics and like going far beyond of integration and practical application of integration, interchangeability, and what that means even to hubbing and networking as compared to what a node is, of similarity of like principle, but thoroughly different as far as like what internet protocol dictates between switching and routing predominantly, not that the word has to be example, but like Cisco switching and routing, what hub is, as compared to a node, and what that really represents of like IP address, or if it's going to be switched and routed, the fastest way, or if it's like a node, it's like no matter what's going through it, I mean, it's like everything like in line going through it is in line. It's not going to be sent a different direction to get there to wherever it's going any faster, because the node is just not designed like a hub, but the principle of its thing about being involved that way is that, and not that at all. It's kind of like something really like really studied and kind of looked at that way. Anyway, so like like there's a lot like I'm looking at in that way, and what methods of banking means to whether or not they've increasing the name of it, increasing the value of a name, and geographically, whatever that means, and what fair use means as compared to a degree level, or what usury is or is not, or even deceptive trade. And you've heard of the phrase default by ignorance. I don't know if I would even term it like that. It almost sounds like the ignorance still of like buying, like bribe. Default by, wait a minute, hold on there. There's the spelling and pronunciation issue. Default by ignorance? Wait a minute. Does it need to be spelled out? So default by lack of experience. Default because of lack of experience is more really what it is. Not that ignorance is anything more than maybe whether non-negotiable, non-transferable itemization is the difference between degreed and non-degreed. And ultimately, whether managing factors have been, given, representation based upon whether or not anything more beyond endorsing an entire employment history, or what commercial paper is, or, even, truthfully, I throw a little humor, I don't like really doing it, but sometimes I'll throw that, economic plea bargain, thing about Ponzi scheming, raffling voucher, some, not that it's sarcasm. Truthfully, I don't really intend it that way, but sometimes I get seriously that not funny about, when I say that sometimes, but yeah. Yeah, so for real, and, not that it's a matinee feature, at the discount window, what the Federal Reserve means, beyond PG-13 parentally guided, acronyms, of presidential governors, and PG-13, the 13 stars, kind of like that. Motion pictures in, Region 0 and Region 1, a motion picture. Not that the word has to be company, although corporation, yeah, something about that in binary numbers and computer programming. Motion picture, the audio production thing about that as well. Thoroughly a little bit more distinctly, as compared to like DVDs that are purchased that automatically reflect identifying regions. Normally, predominantly, I mean, if it's going to be anything other than 0 or 1, normally, between, the entire world, and I'm assuming that region 0 is suggesting that maybe that might be of language, like English speaking language, worldwide, what region 0 means. I'm with that assumption, but anyway, like region 1, showing that the United States, North America, and like Canada, in that way. But anyway, yeah. So so like I'm looking at that in the I-10 thing still, that come on, Oracle. It's kind of like Oracle. It's kind of like kind of like not funny about the location in Houston and how. I mean, really, I mean, what I've been talking about, and I'm going to kind of wait on something about that, yeah, but, it's kind of like, hey, man, come on, Oracle, man, you got your egg roll, you got your eggs, you got your egg thing, like Mork and Mindy, right, fly be free, kind of like, bicentennial thing about Oracle, right? Anyway, yeah, so, it's kind of like the Mount Olives issue, it's kind of like, so, like, ridiculously, cool in the way, like, hey, Oracle, up you 1-0 kind of thing, hey, but hey, yeah, for real, okay. So anyway, as far as that goes, there's a little bit of a American thing about, Christianity in that way and what absolute value is to a 90-degree right angle, like, the Israeli flag, like a cold blue thing, and the 6-point star, or what, 6-point star alphanumerically combined equaling 138, or telepathic angle, and the list goes on and on, I might even throw in the Donald Trump thing, but, I don't want to, really, I'm kind of like, having my thing, about, presidents, and it's kind of like when I got through the Mount Rushmore thing, and even the Richard Nixon thing, something about, Nixon was about the Watergate thing, and, normally, people's perception of Watergate might not necessarily be the Hopsing thing of orientation, and like, a gold rush thing, the panning of gold, and what, calamity chain, prepaid postage is to, the thing about panning, in the way of what the pearly gates of heaven represent, not necessarily the gold of Stockton Goldman, it's kind of like, I'm looking at that Hopsing thing, and like orientation in that way, of waveform, compared to like prepaid postage of like, what a high rise is, and in a way of like prepaid, just like postage, I mean, like God, I just got like, like these people really hear themselves speak and think about it, and when I really hear myself talk sometimes, I mean, the prepaid postage is almost like, hey man, that's like a cool prepaid postage of like a high rise, for real, Yeah, so anyway, it's like some monumental thing that I'm thinking about that way. So anyway, not necessarily the word monumental, but yeah, you know, so in that way, yeah, you know, the absolute value, a representative of the right 90-degree right angle, and the absolute value representative of, like, the, you know, the Star of David, and the Israeli flag, you know, Israel being 64, even Oracle, you know, it doesn't have to be really up your 1.0, but, you know, Oracle 10.10 thing, it's almost like, you know, a requirement, you know, with 64 an American thing, based upon, you know, my thing about it, yeah. So anyway, yeah, in that way, you know, even, you know, between like Egypt and Israel, being like an Israeli, being 73 in Harrison in the Houston, Texas area, and what that means, you know, to electronic power in Houston, Texas, or Alphamerics USA, and, you know, a lot about it. So anyway, you know, hey, so anyway, I'm going to take a break, and yes, I am, and wow, I actually have been speaking a little bit more than an hour. Hey, all right, yeah. So anyway, I'm going to take a break right now, okay, and hey, yeah, okay, good, all right.